Good evening, everybody. I'm Brett L. Pape. That's Coach Bruce, and this is the Coach Approach. Coach, how you doing, man? It's been a while. It's been obviously we've talked, we've texted, and so forth. But last show we did was the night before the draft, and now I feel like we're here right before the night before the start of the season. Excited to be here again, and love to be able to talk football with you, Coach.
Oh man, I missed you, bro. And it's funny, man. This is like the highlight of the year, right? We don't get to do this podcast in the off season. We both have crazy schedules and kids going off to college, getting their master's degree, and all the other stuff that's going on. But always a joy to get on here and talk football. Now we get down to where we get to find out if our picks pan out and the guys that we like are relevant and as good as we think they're going to be this year. So this is a fun time of the year, man.
It is a fun time of the year. I always like this time. You hear or you read, because we're Twitter people, we're on there, X people, whatever you want to call us. I mean, that's where I get most of my fantasy information from. And you got all these people, all the different takes and so forth. And it's nice now we can kind of get in to see, how it's all going to play out.
Yep.
Well, let's get right into it, Coach. And just for you guys that are joining us, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Wanted you guys to, before we get into the show, kind of talk about who we are, but more importantly, about what we'll be doing. And we're both former high school football coaches, both longtime Dynasty and redraft fantasy players. I was fortunate enough to spend some time with Dynasty Nerds. You've worked with Yards Per and their website with your countdown to the top 32 team type of thing that you were doing a couple years ago. Missed it this year. Wish that or hope that we can get it back going next year. But with that being said, this is our third season. Looking forward to getting into it. We always have a Wednesday night show where we kind of recap the week before, talk about big games coming up, talk about waiver wire pickups if you're still picking up waiver wire people on a Wednesday night. That's our Wednesday show. And then really excited. Last year was the first year we're here with Yards Per. Alex Johnson has kind of given us anything we wanted as far as time and when we want to be on the podcast show. And so we came up with the Sunday start and sit where we also made our picks. And I don't know about you, Coach, but that kind of at the end of the year, that was I enjoyed that show more than I enjoyed the Wednesday show.
Yeah, the Wednesday night shows, you got a Thursday night football game, right? So we're trying to do it before that Thursday night game so we could highlight that game and starts and sits for that game. So you don't really get a chance to kind of do it again before the Sunday slate. So now we added that Sunday morning show that we go through all the starts and sits. We're going to be adding DFS this year. We're going to talk about player props that we like and parlays that we like. And so we're going to kind of get into that side of it too. But yeah, this is the fun time of the year, man. This is all the hard work in the off season and all the podcasts we listen to and the Sirius XM radio. And, this is the first year I've missed the Fantasy Expo. So I missed seeing everybody there. I was there the 2 years prior, but now we get to kind of find out, hey, rubber meets the road. We're going to find out who's real and who's not.
Can't wait. I'll tell you, I've already got the YouTube subscription for NFL Sunday Ticket all taken care of. All I got to do now is just get to next Sunday. But before we do that, let's get into it, because we always start with every show with the news that's kind of gone down. And unless you were underneath the rock the last few days, anybody and everybody's been talking about the Jonathan Taylor situation with the Indianapolis Colts. He had a little deadline up until yesterday at 1 o'clock West Coast time, where he was able to try and find himself a suitor to trade for. Apparently, there were two teams that made inquiries or made attempts to trade for him, but he didn't get traded. The Indianapolis Colts decided to keep him. And then not only that, right afterwards, they decided to keep him on the PUP, which means this is terrible for fantasy owners, but we're not going to have him for the first 4 weeks. And this situation, I'll tell you, if I was you right now and I was drafting, I know you just made a pick before the show for a redraft league. You're sitting there in the 4th or 5th round. You had a shot to take Jonathan Taylor, and you chose not to. And it's kind of be the situation up until the season starts with drafters. They don't really know what to do with them. What are you going to do, and what is your theory on how you would handle Jonathan Taylor as a fantasy owner?
I'd say, I mean, I definitely bought the dip. I've been doing drafts since I did one right before the NFL draft in April, which I know a lot of people think is crazy, but it's fun to see how your rookie picks pan out based on the draft. But, I bought the dip, and I also had a draft just now. We were just talking about I made a pick, and we were talking, I was on the clock at back-to-back picks at the 3-4 turn from the 1.01, and I went with Dak Prescott as my second quarterback. So I've got Mahomes, Prescott, got a Monter St. Brown I took in round 2, and then I was up at the 4.1. Jonathan Taylor sitting on the board. It's a heavy PPR league. There's bonus points for long receptions and those things. And it was Calvin Ridley for me, or it was don't want to take a Travis Etienne, a JT, and maybe try to get that anchor running back. And I chose to take the wide receiver and go Calvin Ridley. I just in redraft, he's going to sit out the 4 games. It is so toxic in that situation between the Colts and Jonathan Taylor right now that I don't trust that in redraft. If somehow he's there at the next time in round 6, 7 turn, then yeah, of course. I mean, at that point, I think you're getting some value, even if he doesn't play until week 6, especially going into your playoff run and later on in the season. But to take him in the first 4 rounds right now in a redraft league, the scoring system the way it is, I wasn't ready to pull the trigger on it. But I think what's crazy about the Jonathan Taylor thing is, like, first off, it's like, for me, I'm like, make it make sense. Right? So your running backs right now are Zach Moss, Deion Jackson, and Evan Hull, who I liked in round 5 out of Northwestern. In the 3 years that Jonathan Taylor's been in the NFL, he's amassed over 3,841 rushing yards and 33 touchdowns. I don't even have to go into the receiving side of it. That's enough for me right there at 5.1 yards per carry. Be like, hey, this guy is an absolute. He's 1 year removed from leading the NFL in rushing. What made the Anthony Richardson pick so exciting was their ability to establish the run game with that offensive line. You open up the RPO, you open up the play action, which for a guy like Anthony Richardson, something that is beneficial to him. Now, there's no threat in the run game with the guys they've got. As much as I love to see these guys play well, I mean, I'm not touching anybody in the Colts backfield right now. I think Anthony Richardson's value comes down a little bit. And so, Michael Pittman, and you want to look at the receivers that they've got there too. I was hoping that Alec Pierce would be a guy that contribute a little bit this year. And now it's like, man, I don't want to touch anybody in that offense right now, until this thing plays out. So there's better guys I can get, I think, at better value. So I think the Jonathan Taylor thing is very surprising. I think there's things that went on behind closed doors that we don't have those intimate details that happen. But, the reality is we're in a time right now where the running back position just isn't valued. You can find a lot of talent every year in the running back. You can get a running back in rounds 2 and 3 and 4, in some cases 5 and 6. You don't want to talk about Pacheco, and you can go on and on about these guys that are late round, even undrafted free agents that have made a name for themselves in the NFL. And owners just aren't willing to pay that position. I'd rather get a one technique and I'd rather go out and get a playmaker. I'd rather go out and get, somebody to solidify my defense or take a top corner. Just the NFL is just not willing to spend money on that position. And you've seen what's happened with Tony Pollard. You saw what happened with Zeke Elliott. You saw what happened with other running backs in the offseason. And for Jonathan Taylor to think he's going to be able to go out there, and the Colts basically put the challenge to him, like, if you think you're worth more than we're willing to give you, we'll let you test the market. And, you couldn't find any suitors that made it worthwhile. Teams aren't going to give up a first-round pick, even for a guy with Jonathan Taylor's talent, to make that move. And so it's a tough spot for Jonathan Taylor to be in. And I hate it for the NFL. I hate it for the running backs. They're so valuable to a good offense. But as long as teams like the Kansas City Chiefs are winning Super Bowls, right? If you look back, when's the last time a guy that led the league in rushing led a team to a Super Bowl? You just don't see it.
Wow. Yeah.
You have teams winning Super Bowls with guys that are not high on the salary cap, man. So it's just, those are the times we're in. So it's unfortunate for Jonathan Taylor. I know that Jacob Sanderson, hates it as a big Colts fan, and he's one of my favorite follows on Twitter. But I know that him and I chatted a little bit on Twitter, and I know he's not real happy with it. And he doesn't understand it either. So it is what it is at this point. We move on, right?
Yeah, you have to. And you talked about possibly taking him at the 5 or 6 turn. I don't even know if I would do that. The unknowing is really hard to handle for me, and I would need to know. I need some certainty, and there's really no certainty at all as it relates to Jonathan Taylor and the Indianapolis Colts. Hey, let's move on to a trade that did happen. And as this is our 3rd year doing the show, Coach, right?
Yep.
How many years have you heard me talk about Trey Lance?
3 years.
Yes, sir.
I did all my work on him going into the draft. So I was a prospect. I graded him out, watched the film, and so we've been talking about him for 3-4 years now.
So Trey Lance is traded to the Dallas Cowboys for a 4th round pick. How this all came about, The day before he gets traded, a couple days before he gets traded, comes out that he was put into basically get the third spot behind Sam Darnold. Everybody knows what has happened with good old Trey Lance over his career. He comes out of North Dakota State. He sits behind Jimmy G for a year. He finally gets keys to the car his second year. And unfortunately, he gets hurt in game 2. We've seen very little of him. We don't know if he's good or not good. And in walks Brock Purdy. San Francisco is able to go all the way to the NFC Championship game. Unfortunately, due to injuries or due to a great Philadelphia Eagles team, they're not able to move on to the Super Bowl. But they have moved on from Trey Lance. That's given up a lot there. We don't know what it's given up in the player, but we certainly know what they gave up in draft picks in order to acquire him. Big move. And before you get into the Dallas side, you being the biggest Dallas Cowboy fan I know, just talk about how it all came to this.
That's the crazy part, right? And I think you and I have talked about this too. Like Trey Lance was never really given the opportunity to be the guy, in my opinion, in the San Francisco offense. He had a couple starts last year. We talked about this earlier. The first game of the season in Chicago in a torrential downpour wasn't really a great game to kind of grade him on. But, you look at this situation and you traded up to get him at the third. You gave up. We could talk about, in essence, you traded multiple first-round picks, a third-round pick, and Trey Lance after you acquired him to just get a fourth-round pick to show for it. So it's but yet San Francisco's got one of the best rosters in the NFL. They're going to try to make a Super Bowl run this year. So at the end of the day, it was just about, hey, it didn't work for us, whether it was scheme fit, whether it was his inability to. There was times he was hesitant in the pocket, wasn't getting to his first read in time. So now the timing and the rhythm of the offense is off. So, San Francisco, I give him credit for at least, admitting and acknowledging that, hey, this is not a spot for him. Let's give him an opportunity to catch on somewhere else. And now if you look at it from a Dallas perspective, I'm going to be very clear. Dak Prescott is the QB1 of the Dallas Cowboys. This is a play by Jerry Jones to light a fire under this organization and say, hey, we have had a roster to compete for a Super Bowl for multiple years now. And we have fallen short. We got knocked out in the divisional round 2 years in a row by your San Francisco 49ers. And it is now time. He didn't bring Trey Lance in to compete with Dak Prescott to be the starting quarterback in 2023, right? He brought him in as a project at only 23 years old to say, hey, this guy does not have, I think he played 18 games at North Dakota State, right? So he doesn't have a lot of game experience underneath him. This is a chance for him to learn behind Dak Prescott, who is a very intelligent quarterback. He's going to be calling the offense this year. Mike McCarthy's giving him the rein to make the proper checks. He has a lot of freedom in that offense. So he's the guy. This is a message that Jerry Jones wants to send to the entire locker room. And yes, it affects the wide receiver room. Yes, it affects the offensive line group. Yes, it affects the defense. Yes, it affects everybody, because the way this works in an NFL locker room, Dak is the unquestioned leader of that franchise, right? And so now by making that move, you put everybody in that locker room on notice. And if I'm a Dak Prescott guy and I support my quarterback, I want to win and help him get to a Super Bowl and win a Super Bowl so he can be my quarterback for the next 5 to 7 years. It's a rallying cry in that locker room to say, hey, we don't necessarily like it, but we understand as an organization why we did it. We understand why Jerry Jones is making this move. We understand the psychological warfare that's kind of happening right now and the mental games that are being played. But Mike McCarthy's on the hot seat. He's got a year. He's taken over play calling. They got rid of Kellen Moore, who's had a top 5 offense. You've got Tyron Smith and Zach Martin aren't getting any younger. You've got Dan Quinn, who they were able to keep as a defensive coordinator for how much longer. The time to win in Dallas is now, and this was simply a way to say, hey, we're not looking at Trey Lance in 2023. We're looking at beyond that. If Dak is not the guy and can't lead us to victories in the playoffs and win on the biggest stage, then we're going to take a shot and see if we can't develop this guy. I think it's a smart move. It was smart for San Francisco to finally say we're letting him go, and it's smart on Dallas's part to say, hey, it's worth a flyer. It's a 4th-round pick, who ironically they got Dak Prescott in the 4th round out of Mississippi State. We know how that's played out. So I don't have an issue with it at all. And the reality is it was a move that Jerry Jones felt he needed to make. And if it works, great. It was a hell of a move. If it doesn't work, there's no harm, no foul. So
I think at the very least, they're going to be able to get that 4th round back in the future. Let's say Dak is great. Let's say Dak does everything you want him to do as a franchise quarterback. If you can develop with this guy, You send him off in a year or two, you're getting at least what you gave up for him back. I think it's a
Bingo.
no lose situation. And for the other side, we talked about it briefly earlier, and that is that, San Francisco, they get to reset the clock a little bit too, as far as when they have to pay a quarterback top dollar money. They get Brock Purdy, who's a year younger in the NFL realm, and it allows him to stay cheap for a couple more years, and they're able to keep that roster those guys, I mean, they've got big money players all over the field. The reason they can do that is because they got guys on rookie contracts. Now they got a guy on a rookie contract picked with the last pick in the draft. He makes probably, if you and I combine our money, we might be close to what Brock Purdy does. Maybe not, but you get my point. All right, hey, let's move on to surprise cuts. And there weren't a lot of them, but there were a couple. And if you were following Twitter 2 years ago and you were looking for a tight end in draft, everybody was talking about how good Albert O of Denver was going to be. I'm not even going to attempt to say the last name, but he was cut yesterday. Other guys to be cut, we'll go through all of them real quick, and then you can kind of touch base on the ones that you think are important. A big darling out of Kansas City all summer was Deneric Prince, running back out of Tulsa. He was cut yesterday as well. Another guy, Dwayne McBride. A lot of people thought that he was going to be able to go in and push, Alex Madison. Colt McCoy was supposed to be the starting quarterback until Kyler Murray comes back. He's cut. Melvin Gordon, who the Ravens brought in late in training camp, he gets cut. And then Robbie Chosen, apparently he wasn't chosen as Miami cut him. Any of those guys kind of strike a surprise in you, or you kind of any thoughts on any of them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Dwayne McBride deal. I'm in Minnesota. Dalvin Cook is no longer there. You've got Alexander Madison in games where he's had to be the RB1. He's played well. He's been fantasy relevant. I think there's some question marks about the long term over a course of a 17-game season. I don't like the depth that they have there. I felt like, but again, we don't know what's on that locker room. We don't know if it's an attitude issue. We don't know if Dwayne McBride just wasn't getting it. The speed of the NFL is much different than what you see in college. So I think they make that move. Deneric Prince is a guy that I talked about a little bit, but I felt like it was a nice landing spot there. And if they were going to eventually move on from CEH at the end of his rookie contract, that's a guy that might be able to fill in. But so, I mean, those were a little bit surprising. I think the bigger surprises that you didn't bring up was, New England cuts, you've only got one quarterback on the roster with Mac Jones. You look at Detroit, they got rid of 3 running backs, and now they've only got Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. There is no third running back. You certainly can't go into week 1, but as Charlie Weiss was saying on Sirius XM, and this is obvious to anybody that pays attention to football, there's a lot of signings that are going to happen. There's a lot of guys going to be added to active rosters. A lot of guys going to be added to the practice squad. So these rosters, we're still a long way from these rosters being completely filled out. But, those were a couple surprises. I think the Colt McCoy thing was a little bit of a surprise in Arizona. Understand that Kyler Murray was not going to be ready. They're certainly tanking for Caleb. It doesn't sound nearly as sexy as tanking for Tua, but we'll have to come up with something. But, they're in the Caleb Williams game. There's been some question marks about Kyler Murray. They put the clause in his contract about having to study film 4 hours a day, and that didn't go over very well, so they had to redo that. But Arizona is an absolute train wreck right now. It's the worst roster in the NFL. I don't think it's going to be close. I mean, I think they're going to finish with the worst record in the league this year, and they're going to have to figure it out. But now you've got Clayton Tune, who I did like as a prospect, especially where he was able to get him in the draft, and David Blau. I mean, who's the quarterback there, right? It's going to be Josh Dobbs. He's got experience. Yeah, he's got experience in that offense, so I think he's going to be your week 1 starter. But at the same point, if you're tanking, if Clayton Tune is a guy that gets ready, find out if you got something. I'd like to see him start a game or two before Kyler Murray comes back, if he comes back at all this year. So we'll see how it plays out.
Hey, let's move on. Last 2 things we're going to talk about before we get into the rest of the show, and that's 2 guys that have not been in camp yet, and they're 2 guys that are obviously pivotal players for 2 teams that want to make a Super Bowl run, and that's Chris Jones of Kansas City and Nick Bosa of San Francisco. Your thoughts, and more importantly, of the 2, or do you think that either one of them are going to be playing week 1?
I think Nick Bosa. I don't know why I'm having a tough time saying Nick Bosa. It's one of the easiest names in the NFL to pronounce, but I think Nick Bosa is going to be done. I think a couple hours ago there was a report that says that they're close to getting him that deal wrapped up. Defensive Player of the Year last season. He's 25 years old. Led the NFL last year, 18.5 sacks, won Defensive Player of the Year. He's made Pro Bowl in 3 out of 4 years. The only year that he didn't in 2020, he missed all but 2 games. So we know what we get with Nick Bosa and how important he is to that defense. The Niners are going to make a run, but I think that deal gets done before week 1. He'll be ready to go. Chris Jones, on the other hand, that's a real concern if I'm Kansas City. You cannot afford to lose a guy in the middle of your defense, and they did start to move him around last year. He played a little bit of D end, play a little bit of 5 technique, and of course he can play in the middle. And he's not a D tackle that's really good against the run, but struggles against the pass, or vice versa. This guy can play and make it happen and be very disruptive in the middle of that defense. So that's a huge loss to me for Kansas City. And there's talk now about him holding out until week 8. If he chooses to do that, he loses $1.1 million a week in game pay. And his last comment was he's willing to do that because he's got the money and he can afford it. So that's the one I'd be very concerned about. I think it'd be tough for Kansas City to make another Super Bowl run if you don't have Chris Jones in the middle of that defense. As much as I love Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid.
We talked about earlier with the contracts of Brock Purdy and rookie quarterbacks or quarterbacks who are on their rookie contract, what it allows that team to do. And you said it. You said Nick Bosa is probably going to sign before that. They're going to be able to find the resources to do that.
Yeah.
Chris Jones, the likelihood is a little bit less when you got the type of quarterback and the type of contract that he takes. Now, granted, he's worth every penny, but you can see where it does kind of handcuff the teams.
No, absolutely. I think, and again, I think it's extremely impactful for me. I'm not picking the Kansas City Chiefs to win a Super Bowl if Chris Jones is not a part of that defense. You've got to be able to do. This isn't like it was. This isn't the '85 Bears, and this isn't defense wins championships. Yes, they're extremely important. You've got to be able to stop the run. You got to be able to run the football in the playoffs. But Kansas City Chiefs have proven you don't necessarily have to run the football when you've got Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and what they can do, and they've shored up a little bit of that offensive line. But Chris Jones is extremely important to me to Kansas City. So if I was to say of the two, even if Nick Bosa was starting to hold out the same amount of time that Chris Jones was, I would say the Chris Jones deal is more impactful than the Nick Bosa deal.
Well, we're going to find out here real quick.
We are.
Hey, let's get into it. Every year, we did this last year when we were lucky enough to start the season off with the Yard Spur, and we came out with our guys, and then we also made the NFL predictions as far as division champs and Super Bowl champ and then MVP and all that good stuff. So let's first get into our guys. And we go strictly off of fantasy positions as far as on the offensive side. And I'll go first at quarterback. And my guy for this season is Jordan Love out of the Packers. I'm really excited about him finally getting an opportunity. You know, he got to be able to spend 3 years in the same system he's in playing now, and he got to do it watching one of the best quarterbacks ever in Aaron Rodgers. And if you're watching any Hard Knocks, you can see the relationship that Aaron is having with Zach Wilson. And you can also, they talked about in the show how right before the start of the Packer camp, Aaron reached out to Jordan Love and kind of said, hey, man, this is finally your team. Best of luck. You got this. I believe in you. So he had great coaching by actual coaches and by being able to watch Aaron Rodgers. He's a former first-round pick. They moved up in the draft to select him. They believed him, and they also believed that other teams were going to take him before they had an opportunity to. And they did something they haven't done very recently, and that's really try and stack the offensive side of the ball with young playmakers. In the last 2 seasons, they drafted Christian Watson, they drafted Romeo Doubs, they drafted Luke Musgrave and Jaden Reed this year. Coach, I like what I've seen in the preseason. I like where I was able to get them in fantasy drafts, and I'm pretty high. I feel like they might have something pretty good here in Jordan Love.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's like the Green Bay Packers, man. They just continue to reload. You know, you did it with Brett Favre. You did it with Aaron Rodgers. You had a couple of years after slipping a little bit in the draft, and now you've got an opportunity with Jordan Love to do the same thing. I think there's a lot to be said for being able to, you know, have a quarterback and go out and get your backup maybe a year or two early, and they can actually sit behind somebody that's going to be a Hall of Famer and learn from those experiences. And Aaron Rodgers is one of the best in the business at understanding pre and post snap checks and what he's doing and reading the defense. So I think there's a lot of growth that Jordan Love's had over the last couple of years underneath Aaron Rodgers. And I think with Christian Watson and Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, and you mentioned the 2 tight ends they brought in, Tucker Kraft's another one that is the 3rd round, you know, draft capital. I like Luke Musgrave, heck of an athlete. Romeo Doubs and Jaden Reed and Christian Watson. All of those guys have the ability to take a quick pass and make a play. All those guys have the ability to run the football on sweeps and on screen game. So I like the pick. I think Jordan Love's going to have a good year too. I think that's a great pick. So I went. So I did a homer pick here, and you're gonna love this too. But I went Brock Purdy. He's going at quarterback 23. He was 5-0 as a starter in the regular season last year. Won a playoff game against Dallas. He was QB6 over that span, and in those 5 starts, he had 11 touchdowns, just 2 interceptions. If you look at the pass catchers they have in San Francisco, you've got George Kittle, very good after the catch. Deebo Samuel. We know what he did when he had to play running back a little bit when they got hit by injuries. Very good after the catch. Brandon Ayuk's got some verticality to him. Really good in the intermediate to longer passes. Christian McCaffrey as an RB1, one of the best pass catching running backs in the history of the game. What he can do with the wiggle. So and then you even got Jordan Mason, who's a guy that's got a little bit of wiggle if you go 3. You got Elijah Mitchell, who's a guy that played well and when he played over 5 yards carry. This is a perfect situation, a landing spot for Brock Purdy. He got thrown into the fire early. This is a guy that started all 4 years at Iowa State. He's got a lot of I coached in Arizona when he was playing at Perry High School out here. So I've got to see him grow up from high school to college to now. And the kid is he's the ultimate professional. He's got a tremendous work ethic, and he had these guys going into the game against Philly with an opportunity to take this team to a Super Bowl. And now he's had a full off season. Yes, he's been hurt. He's been, the elbows had to get healed up, but he knew he was the guy this off season going in. And so I think that was a big deal. And now he's got a chance to hopefully he can stay healthy for 17 games. That offensive line, you got Trent Williams. The tackle positions are pretty solid. They're a little bit weaker up the middle. But what do you do in that scenario? Quick pass game. Let your guys make plays. Get the ball out of his hands early. Rely on Christian McCaffrey. They only gave up 7 sacks and 11 pressures, a starting unit for San Francisco, the O-line, and over 2,005 pass snaps together. So this is an offense that's going to click under Brock Purdy. So I just hope he stays healthy.
That's the key right there. Can he stay healthy for 17 games? Because, he is small. And he does like to move in the pocket and manipulate and get guys open with his feet. And I worry about his ability to stay healthy. But, no, I love the pick. And obviously San Francisco loves the pick because they just traded away a guy
they sure
they
did.
invested a lot in. Let's move on to running back. And my running back is the guy that kind of has been kind of darling on Twitter. I know you and I talked about him a lot last year on our Sunday show and our Wednesday show as far as a possible waiver wire pickup. And that's Jaylen Warren out of the Steelers. And everyone likes to talk about going 0 running back type of situations in drafts. And when you do that, you select wide receivers, tight end, and maybe quarterback in the first 5 or 6 rounds. And then you try and hammer running backs. If you got an opportunity and you're going 0 running back and you got an opportunity to take Jaylen Warren in the 9th or the 10th round, I feel like you got to do it every time. I feel like he's going to have standalone value even when Najee Harris is in the lineup. It's already been determined that he's going to be the 3rd down back. And the limited amount of time that he came out, remember, it took him a while to kind of crack the lineup a bit. That's because he was an undrafted rookie. But when he got in, he carried the ball 77 times for 369 yards, 5 yards a carry, a touchdown. But here's what I really like about him. And I love that he got 28 receptions for 214 yards. It just shows that he can be an everyday, all down back. And I'm just big on him. I feel like his cost, you got to take him whenever you get the opportunity because if Najee goes down, he's going to be an absolute asset. And I think he's an asset even if Najee doesn't go down.
No, I think he's got standalone value every week, as the pass catcher in that back and the 3rd down back. And I think what Kenny Pickett's doing, I wasn't real big on Kenny Pickett coming out. I wasn't real big on the Matt Canada offense, but Matt Canada has grown as a play caller towards the end of last season. He started doing some things, longer depth of target with the receiving core. You bring in George Pickens, they can take the top off. Great at the contested catch. You have Deontay Johnson and Pat Fryermuth. I think you're opening up the run lane there. They've got to stay together on the offensive line, but I'm also high on Jaylen Warren. I think there's real opportunity there for him. And if something does happen, Najee Harris, and doesn't stay healthy, again, we don't want to hope for injuries, but Jaylen Warren's the guy that can give you RB1 value for sure.
Who do you got at receiver, Coach? We'll let you go first on receiver.
Well, let me do my running back real quick.
Oh,
We skipped my running back.
I don't even value running backs. I don't even need to hear you.
You're going anchor running back, man.
There
Skip
you
one.
go.
Let's just talk wide receivers. I get it, man. I love the draft strategy. So I went Jahmyr Gibbs.
Okay.
He's now a month ago.
Huh?
Yeah, a month ago, 2 months ago, when I was doing drafts, there's a lot more value there. I could get him in the late third round and sometimes early fourth. We've seen his ADP creep up, so he's not as much value as what you were getting before. But look, they traded up to get him at the 12th overall pick, right? He caught 104 passes in 3 college seasons, 2 at Georgia Tech, not known for throwing the ball to running backs a lot. And then there's 1 year at Alabama. 195 touches last season for 1,334 scrimmage yards, 6.1 yards per carry, 7 yards per touch. He was already running behind an NFL offensive line in Alabama, right? He's already running a pro-style offense. So in 20, but if you compare it, if you look at DeAndre Swift and his time in Detroit, in 27 games over the last 2 years, he had 148 targets. That's 5.6 per game. That's projected at 95 targets over a 17-game season. If you're asking me who I think is a better talent, Jahmyr Gibbs or DeAndre Swift, it's not close. It's Jahmyr Gibbs. And so now you plug him into that role, he's going to get upwards of 100 targets this year. And I think he's going to get more of that volume, even with David Montgomery there. He's going to see some volume in the run game as well. I expect him to be at, 200 and 220 total touches. And that's enough for me to move him into, RB1, low end RB1, high end RB2 territory. So I'm big on Jahmyr Gibbs this year.
How can you not be? He was so, in college, he was so exciting. I've been in one Debbie draft in my career as a fantasy football player, and that was 3 years ago, right after his freshman season. I was able to get him with the sixth pick. Man, I've been following that guy from day one, and I can't wait to see him. And I made a trade just to move up to the second pick in my home league rookie draft to grab him, just because I couldn't leave the draft without having him.
I've got a lot of shares of him, man. I love him.
Yeah. Wide receiver, where are you going with wide receiver, Coach?
So I went. So this was tough. There's a minor St. Brown, but his ADP is moving up so much now that I didn't want to go there. I felt like that was too much chalk. Same thing with Garrett Wilson, with Aaron Rodgers. Those are certainly my guys. I love Calvin Ridley, Christian Watson, Brandon Cooks. I think the value is really good with those guys too, and I think they're all going to have a good year this year. But I went Deontay Johnson. I'll buy the dip. He's going at wide receiver 32. He finished at wide receiver 8 in 2021. I think the combo of Mitchell Trubisky starting the season last year and Kenny Pickett being on his rookie year has a lot to do with his lack of performance, especially not being able to find the end zone last year. This is a guy in 2020 and 2021 that scored 15 touchdowns. So last year is an outlier. It's not going to be the norm. So DJ's averaged 153 targets and 94 grabs per season over the last 3 years. He's an elite route runner that can win the line of scrimmage. And I think what a lot of people don't realize about Deontay Johnson, I think they look at the size and say slot guy, or he's a Z that plays off the line of scrimmage. I think it was like 70% of his snaps on reception perception that Matt Harmon does a phenomenal job with. He lines up at the X receiver, and he's on the line of scrimmage. He's got a complete toolbox of release moves. Very difficult to get hands on him. So he wins at the short to intermediate areas of the field. He finished in the 84th or better percentile in press coverage, against man coverage, and against zone coverage. He was 84th percentile or better in those 3 areas. So this is a guy that's going to get back to, low wide receiver 1 or high wide receiver 2 territory with the potential to be a wide receiver 1. I think he's going to be at 140 plus targets this year.
You know what? If you would have asked me a month or 2 months ago if I was interested in anybody other than Jaylen Warren on that offense, I probably would have told you no. But after watching in the preseason, seeing the development of a Pickett, seeing how Pickens is doing what he does, Pickens is going to open up the middle of the field for Deontay Johnson a heck of a lot. I like it, and I'm kind of looking forward to actually.
Pickens, another one I like.
I'm liking what I'm seeing out of Pittsburgh. I'm kind of, I don't know why I should be surprised. You're looking at an organization that has been run so well for so many years. They have an incredible coach. So, I like that pick. Let's move on to wide receiver, Coach. That was your wide receiver, so I'll go with mine. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time because we already know what he's done in the past. But I love Calvin Ridley. I can't help but pick him as my guy. I feel like the offense that he's going to is going to suit his skill set perfectly. He's got a quarterback that, they're already – you have not heard anything negative come out about Calvin Ridley since he's joined that organization. He made a little gambling mistake last year while he was injured and all that other stuff. We know about all the stuff from the past. But let's not forget the year that he had in 2020. Had over 1,300 yards receiving, 9 touchdowns. The guy is just a credible route runner. I love what they're going to be able to do with him in that offense. And I think you're going to, if you're a fantasy manager, you could be pretty damn happy if you got Ridley on your team this year.
Yeah, I tell you what, and you know, I have a friend of mine that was a wide receiver coach in Jacksonville last year, so he didn't get a chance to work with really because of the whole situation over there much, but he's an absolute stud, man. He's a beast. There's a clip on YouTube, I think it was, that I saw it of Zay Jones running a route one-on-ones, right, which is the best period for wide receivers and corners. I used to love when we got to do one-on-ones against the DBs, but Zay Jones runs a route. I think it was a comeback route, and does a phenomenal job. And looks good, right? Wins, creates outside space, throws on time, looks good. Calvin really goes up and gets the next rep, same route. And I'm telling you, there was a vast difference in the explosiveness coming in and out of their cuts from Zay Jones, who's a guy that had a pretty darn good year last year in that offense with Trevor Lawrence. And it really just brings a whole different dimension to that offense. So I'm very high on Trevor Lawrence this year. I'm very high on that offense. I'm excited to see what those guys do. I'm excited to see what so I just got him. Shout out to Brad Starks over at Roto Lounge. I do his bourbon bowl every year. And I just had, right before we went on to do the podcast, I was sitting there at the 4.1, and Calvin Ridley was sitting there, and it was a no-brainer for me to take that guy early in the 4th round when he's going in some drafts, you know, mid-round 3. So I'll take the value there for sure.
Love it, love it. Alex Johnson here, a few of his guys. And if you follow Alex, you know he's been talking about these guys the whole time.
Oh, yeah. Love Alex.
Rashad White, obviously a big guy. I think he was your running back 5 in the class at Arizona State. Rashawn Johnson. I love Rashawn Johnson, but a guy who's got a lot of Khalil Herbert. I hope Rashawn takes a year or two before he fully takes over the backfield. And Jaden Reed, I've already talked a little bit about him. I love Jaden Reed. He's pretty much had that slot receiver position locked up since the first day of camp. Coming out of Michigan State, he's a great player. I'm really excited about what he can do. And we've already talked about Jordan Love. I think Jaden Reed's going to be very much like a security blanket in the middle of the field and able to kind of give an easy target for Jordan Love. So love those picks, Alex. Let's move on to tight end. Why don't you go first on your tight end, Coach?
So I took, I've got Pat Freiermuth, Dalton Schultz, Juwan Johnson, Luke Musgrave. Those are all guys that I'm high on, honorable mention. But the guy I wanted to focus on is Darren Waller. Now, again, a month ago, 2 months ago, I got a lot more value with Darren Waller. As soon as he was traded to the Giants, like he instantly to me becomes the number one target hog in that offense, and a Brian Dable offense with Daniel Jones, who showed a lot of progression last year as a quarterback there. But I love Darren. I mean, if you look at the receiver group, Isaiah Hodgins, Darius Slayton, Paris Campbell, Sterling Shepard, Wan'Dale Robinson, they're all the same guys. The only guy that's different is Jalen Hyatt, right? He's got a little bit more verticality to him. He's a high-end speed guy. But you look at Darren Waller, he wins at all 3 levels of the field. He can play inline. The Raiders used to like to line him up at H-back, right, to get free releases. But Darren Waller can win. He can win on the outside. He can win in the slot. He can win, inline. So I'm huge on him. I get the cons. He's missed 14 games over the last 2 years. But if you look at 2019 and 2020, 262 targets, 197 grabs, 2,341 yards, and 12 touchdowns. In 11 games in 2022 before the injury, he had 8.5 targets per game. 5 grabs, 60 yards a game. That projects 145 targets, over 1,000 yards receiving. And you're getting him at the tight end 5 right now. And he was going in some drafts. I was able to get him in round 5 and round 6. Tight end premium, you're going to have to pay a little bit more than that. But you're starting to see him now creep up into that round 4. Guys that want to make sure they're getting a top tier tight end, especially in tight end premium leagues or half point PPR leagues. You're starting to see him creep up a little bit. But I'm real big on Darren Waller this year. I think he leads that entire team in targets and receptions this year, and then it's going to come down to how often that team can get in the red zone and be relevant. So,
I think they're going to get there a lot, Coach. I'm really high on the New York Giants, and I know as a Dallas Cowboys fan, that's a tough.
No, division. I get it.
That division is very tough, and I think that if they weren't able to address the receivers, and listening to the receivers you just listed off, they weren't able to address the receivers. Darren Waller was perfect for them. And the only issue you brought it up was his health. If he can stay healthy, I'll tell you what, there's a lot of people talking about he could be tight end 2. Tight end 1 seems a little bit much with Kelsey, but I'll tell you, with the guys that he's got around him that are other pass catchers, Darren Waller looks really nice to me as well. My guy's a little bit different. My guy, it's funny, the guy that made Darren Waller, or maybe Darren Waller made him, but when Darren Waller had all his great years, it was always with Derek Carr. And now Derek Carr moves on to New Orleans, and I really like their fourth-year tight end, Juwan Johnson. Last year, Juwan Johnson had 42 receptions for 508 yards and 7 touchdowns. He was a hog in the end zone area. And what I love about him is he's going into his 4th year. Is from day one, since Derek has been there, all he's talked about is the relationship the two of them have. Talked about how he can't believe that he was able to come into a situation with a tight end like that. And I say why that means a lot to me is that he's already shown that he loves throwing the tight ends with what he had with Waller. I think where you can get Juwan Johnson, and you and I are drafting right now as the coach approach, and Juwan Johnson went in the 11th round. If I can pass on tight end and wait all the way to the 11th to get a guy like Juwan Johnson, I'm doing it every time because I really feel like he's going to have a great year this year.
Yeah, I think, and you hit it on the head, and I can promise you, Derek Carr spending some time with Juwan Johnson and talk about the things that made Darren Waller and that Raiders offense special. How he attacked stems, how he attacked linebackers, how he attacked safeties. He's a guy that has an opportunity to be relevant. And now you take Michael Thomas, Mr. Slant, whatever you want to call him, and then you add Chris Olave. Those are some guys that can make some things happen. There's going to be a lot of room to operate for Juwan Johnson in this offense because of those two guys on the outside.
Love it. Thank you for a little bit of confirmation. You ready? You ready to move on to the part that I think it's funny because did you pick Kansas City winning the Super Bowl last year?
I did.
You did?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, on our show? Because I went back and watched it.
Not on our show. I didn't know. I probably didn't pick Kansas City until halfway through the year. Who did I pick last year? I don't remember who I picked.
Philadelphia.
I did pick Philadelphia.
You picked Philadelphia.
I was a year too early.
There we go. Well, this is the show where we make our predictions for both the division winners and also the Super Bowl, while also making our picks on who we think we're going to be the award winners when it's all said and done. I didn't put a lot of stuff down. I kind of want to go through this quickly. Feel free to add or tell me why I'm an idiot or why you're the smartest guy around when it comes up to your turn. But we're going to start off with the most important division in your eyes, and that's the NFC East. And I got to tell you, I can't not. Last year I went with the Dallas Cowboys, and it was so weird because I went with the Cowboys, you went with the Eagles.
Yeah.
But this year we're going to flip-flop, or at least I'm flip-flopping. I'm going with Philadelphia. What Howie Roseman's been able to do every offseason, he's no longer doing it with a rookie quarterback contract. He now gave Jalen Hurts the big money. But despite that, he was still able to bring in guys. He still was able to maneuver the draft so that he was able to get a guy like Jalen Carter. He was still able to bring in DeAndre Swift for like a 4th-round pick during the draft. What he is able to do and surround himself with the type of talent that team has, it's hard for me not to pick Philadelphia.
Yeah, it's there's a stat. I think it's 2003, 2004, if I remember correctly, is the last time anybody in the NFC East won back-to-back titles, and that was the Eagles. So they won it last year. So odds tell you that it's not supposed to happen this year, right? I'm a Cowboy fan, so I feel like I should turn the hat around for this one, but I do have Philly green on. It's Philadelphia. I mean, they've got in my opinion, they've got the best roster in the NFL. Howie Roseman should win GM of the year for I don't know how many years in a row. The fact that you were able to get Nakobe Dean, Jalen Carter has some of the stuff that happens pre-draft, so he drops. You end up getting Jalen Carter. You add that to a defense that's already stacked and loaded. You lose Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. All you do is come in and you replace him. You've still got the corners. You're still very good up front. The offensive line's one of the best offensive lines in the league. You bring in Rashad Penny, right? We can go on and on. Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, A.J. Brown. Like they're so good and so loaded. And that is a team. And then you have Jalen Hurts. They've got the play on 4th and 1 or, if it's goal line, you're going to put Jalen Hurts. You're going to run the scrum. Nobody can stop it. I just don't see how anybody. Now, you could say this. You could say Dallas finds a way to sneak out division title. But the reality is when it comes playoff time, Philadelphia got to sit there and watch, Kansas City celebrate last year. And that to me is a very, very good motivator to get that far. At the end of the day, nobody cares or remembers who lost the Super Bowl. You remember who won the Super Bowl. So that motivation that Philly has going this year I think is extremely high. And Howie Roseman continues to just reload every offseason. He's been very smart in the draft. And it's Philadelphia. I mean, I hate to sit here and spend 5 minutes talking up the one team that I hate more than anybody, but the reality is I can be subjective for the podcast, and it's Philadelphia for sure.
That's a tough division, though, because we already talked about the Giants, Washington. Sam Howell looked great last week.
Yeah.
You never know. I mean, it's going to be a fun season in the NFC East. Let's move on to the NFC South, and this might be the weakest division. You've got a lot of young quarterbacks, and for that reason, I'm taking New Orleans. I like, and it's not just because I'm a Fresno State guy. Maybe it's a little bit, but whatever. We'll move on from that. But I like Derek Carr. I like what they've all. That's another organization that has always been solid. I like where they're at defensively. Kamara's going to be out a couple games, but I like bringing in Jamal Williams for the role that he's going to have. I think the development of Kendra Miller. You may not see much from him early on, but I feel like he's going to have a role later on in the season. And just for the quarterback alone, I got the Saints winning it.
Yeah, I've got the Saints winning it too. And look, it's the return of Michael Thomas, the rising star in Chris Olave. We just touched on all the weapons they have on offense. But let's not forget, this defense is pretty stout too. This defense year in and year out, and they've got a very soft schedule. I took the Saints defense. I'm not a guy that loves drafts with kickers and defenses, but some of these home leagues, I can't get these guys convinced to get rid of it.
30 years I made it, we're still doing that.
But I took the Saints, and almost every redraft that had a defense, I was able to wait, let everybody else take the Cowboys and the Niners and the Eagles early while I loaded up my bench. And I'll take the Saints because they've got a soft schedule all the way through week 9. And at that point, I can kind of pick and choose and play the waiver wire. But, yeah, I think the Saints are the team in that division. And I think Atlanta is doing some good things. I'm still not a big Arthur Smith guy, but you can't question the run game and what he was able to do with Cordell Patterson. And now you add Bijan Robinson. I think Atlanta's another year or two away. They just got too many holes to fill. Carolina has got the rookie quarterback, and they've got some changes that they made there. And Tampa Bay with Baker Mayfield is going to be abysmal this year. So I think it's going to be New Orleans for sure.
All right, hey, let's move on to the NFC West. And I went a different direction. I'm not saying that you went any direction, but I didn't pick San Francisco, and I picked Seattle. I'll tell you, 2 years ago, in fact, it wasn't even 2 years ago. It was last year. We were sitting there, and we thought they picked Geno Smith over. I watched the show today. We felt like with them picking Geno Smith over Locke, that they were tanking, so to speak, for a Bryce Young or for a quarterback this year. And the reality is that and then looking back, we should never thought John Snyder or Pete Carroll would even be the type of person that would want to tank and do something like that, because they came out and they played pretty damn good football. They've been able to address the defensive line, the defensive side of the ball. They have a philosophy. Their philosophy is to run it down your throats, beat you the play action pass. They address running back position with Rashad Penny being hurt year after year. They got Kenneth Walker in the second round last year. He had a little bit of injury bug. But again, we talk about the philosophy changing the NFL when it comes to running backs. So this year they take another running back in the second round. And I like him a lot. I like both those guys, and they're different. And I think they're both, we talk about standalone value. I think they're both going to have standalone value throughout the whole year. I had no issues taking Zach Charbonnet when I was on the clock and it was his turn to take him. Kenny Walker didn't scare me at all. I feel like both of them are going to have standalone value. I just like Seattle. I took Seattle.
Yeah, I think it's a great pick. I mean, you look at that offense, adding Jackson Smith and Jigba to Tyler Lockett, who is underappreciated every year. All Tyler Lockett does is come and put up numbers, and he outperforms DK Metcalf. But then you have DK Metcalf, who's still a young guy, still kind of growing into his own there. But, yeah, I mean, Geno, he resurrected his career, and he'll tell you he should have been a starter, long before he came to Seattle. Just never got the opportunity. But I didn't go Seattle, but I think that's a great pick, and I absolutely can see a scenario where Seattle wins that division. I went San Francisco for all the reasons we talked about with Brock Purdy and that roster and where we're at. I think Nick Bosa's deal gets done. So I'm going with San Francisco simply because it's just a better roster. And I think Mike Shanahan's extremely fired up, or Kyle Shanahan's extremely fired up right now about how last season ended with Brock Purdy getting hurt and then Trey Lance getting hurt and then Purdy having to go back in, and all he could do was hand the ball off against Philadelphia in the playoff game. So San Francisco's fired up. I think they're going to come out and win that division, but I think Seattle makes the playoffs.
Let's move on to the NFC North, and this is a division that no longer has Aaron Rodgers in it.
Yep.
You kind of thought, the way Minnesota's been, they won 13 games last year with Kirk Cousins' back, but they kind of made a lot of moves that kind of made it look like they were almost getting ready for a rebuild, walking away from Dalvin Cook, walking away from Smith, who moved on to greener pastures, so to speak. And so for that reason, I'm going with the Detroit Lions. I feel like what Dan Campbell showed at the end of the year with that team, I feel like they've done great things on both sides of the ball. They took that Matthew Stafford trade. They got a couple first-round picks out of it. And they were also able to keep moving along with Jared Goff. Jared Goff has done enough for them to make them not have to make a move at quarterback, which has allowed them to get a better roster. And if there was ever a year for the Detroit Lions to finally win it, it's this year.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I was not a big fan of the Dan Campbell hire, when they brought him on, because lack of experience as a coach. He's never been a coordinator. But what he brings to that locker room and just being tough as nails and a guy that you want to root for. I took Detroit too. I think it comes down to Detroit and Minnesota. I think Green Bay can be relevant just because I think they're well coached. But neither one of these guys can play defense, between Detroit and Minnesota. But, Detroit, I think, has done more to improve on that side of the ball. But they have a top 5 offensive line that's also young. I think it's Detroit. I think what they do there offensively and what they can do in that division, I think Detroit's it's king of the jungle, right? I think it's the Lions for me too. So we agree on that one.
Let's move on to the AFC, which is probably the tougher conference. In fact, it's as tough as a conference I think it's ever been. And let's start off with a real tough division, and that's the AFC East.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go ahead and go first. And I took Miami. The only concern I have about Miami is whether or not Tua can play all 17 games or even 15, 16. But other than that, I feel like they've done a great job getting that team ready to go. I don't know what it is with Buffalo. I think some teams just can't get over the hump. I have all the belief in the world in Josh Allen, but the way they lost last year, the way they've lost the last few years, when it's mattered the most, that kind of takes a toll on you after a while. And for that and for other reasons, for what Miami's been able to do both in the draft and with moves they've made, I'm going with Miami.
Yeah, look, hey, it's not a bad pick. And this is a division I've looked at.
Yeah, what about the Jets? I didn't even mention the Jets.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it and you go, and my comment I have is not so fast, Mr. Rodgers. I mean, he dominated the NFC North for a long time. Now you move into the AFC East with Miami and New England and the run that they went on, and Bill Belichick's always going to make that team somewhat relevant and competitive week in and week out. I went Buffalo Bills just simply because, Josh Allen, I think, is an X factor there. I love what, bringing in James Cook. I think what he's going to be able to do this year in that offense is being a little bit more of that RB1. And the usage he has had in the preseason, again, we talked about the utilization chart that they have with My Fantasy Life that Dwayne McFarland's done a phenomenal job with. But I just think it's Buffalo. I think they're extremely motivated. It's a little upset, frustrating to see Von Miller's going to miss the first part of the season. But I think the Buffalo Bills, at the end of the deal, are going to be there. I think the Jets are another year away. And I think they've got to add a few more pieces. But it's hard to go against Aaron Rodgers, but we're in the same division as Buffalo with Josh Allen. I think it's a little different deal. So I think it's Buffalo for me.
There you go. I can't even really argue it on the fact that I just did a few minutes ago. Let's move on to the AFC West. And the AFC West, I mean, for me, until anybody.
You on AFC South or West?
I'm going West. So if you had differently there, switch it up. AFC West, I got Kansas City. I can't not pick them until Herbert can show that he can beat Kansas City consistently and do it over a 17-game season. So it's Kansas City for me.
Yeah, never vote against my Mahomie, right? So
There you
it's
go.
Kansas City for me too. And the LA Chargers a couple years ago, going into that season before they lost for Sean Slater, and I felt like the Chargers had a great roster, and we saw what Austin Eckler did last year. I do think Kellen Moore is going to be great for Justin Herbert. He did it in Dallas, where they were consistently a top 5 offense, or top 10 offense in the NFL, put up a lot of yards and a lot of points. But Kellen Moore has struggled in playoff games to call good games. Sometimes he has a tough time with in-game adjustments. I think it's Kansas City. As long as Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce are healthy and they're playing. Now, earlier in the show, we talked about Chris Jones. Again, I'm going to say if Chris Jones is going to hold out, as long as it sounds like he might, then I think that's going to be a little bit tougher. But I think once they get in the playoff run and Chris Jones is back at some point, I have a hard time seeing anybody going on to Arrowhead. They've got to win that division. They got to get home field advantage, I think, to make another Super Bowl run. But as long as those guys are there, man, it's Kansas City Chiefs for me. I don't know where Brett went, but we lost him. So I'll start out with AFC South. We've got I went Jacksonville Jaguars. I don't see, and I think they run away with it. As much as a job as I think Mike Vrabel does with Tennessee, I don't trust the quarterback situation there. Even though they brought in DeAndre Hopkins, you've got Treylon Burks, who's been battling some injuries off and on since he's entered the NFL. So I don't see that as a real threat. I think Indianapolis has got a lot of holes to fix. We know the Jonathan Taylor situation. Houston's in rebuild mode completely. So to me, it's Ridley's believe it or not. It's Jacksonville. I think they've loaded up on the offensive side of the ball. Christian Kirk coming off a career year. Zay Jones played well last year. Evan Ingram is definitely serviceable as a tight end. Had a breakout year last year for him after having a couple down years with the Giants. So I think Trevor Lawrence takes a big step this year in solidifying himself as a potential top 5 and a future franchise quarterback in the NFL. So I'm going Jacksonville.
Coach, sorry, I had to take off. I had a knock.
Oh, you're all right.
I had a knock at the door. I go open it. And there's a car accident right outside my house.
Nice.
So one of the parties in the accident is using my phone. I hope they leave it here when they leave. All right, hey, so you're talking AFC South.
Yep.
We're both on the same page here. Jacksonville, I was really impressed with the way they came back, the fortitude that they showed in that game with the LA Chargers in the playoffs. I'm all on board. I'm excited because you like to see good young talent. People talked about generational talent when it comes to Trevor Lawrence. You like to see that actually come to fruition, and it looks like they got a good thing going there with Jacksonville.
Agreed.
Let's move on to the AFC North. And AFC North, I mean, you got Baltimore. They just re-upped good old Lamar. They brought in some receiver help. We've already talked about Pittsburgh looking much better offensively in the preseason. We know what they have on the defensive side. But despite all that, I still have to go with Cincinnati. I feel like this is, if you're from Cincinnati, you had good years periodically with, Carson Palmer, a little bit with Andy Dalton, but they really got something here with Joe Burrow. I expect Joe Burrow to get his big money contract within the next week or two, and I expect Cincinnati to continually compete for the AFC North Championship. I got them winning it this year.
Yeah, I've got Cincinnati too. And look, I think this is a very balanced division. I mean, it's a tough division. I like what Baltimore has done with getting the Lamar deal done. J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards appear to be healthy coming into the season. You add Zay Flowers, so I'm very, very high on. Rashad Bateman now back from the foot injury. You add in Odell Beckham. There's some opportunities there with Mark Andrews. So I think from an offensive perspective, we're going to see Baltimore put up a lot of points, and we're going to see that offense be very relevant. Pittsburgh, we talked about. Cleveland, I think in the run game with Nick Chubb, finally, Kareem Hunt's not there. I think Nick Chubb has a chance to lead the NFL in rushing. But again, NFL rushing leaders don't win Super Bowls. And I think Deshaun Watson's still got a lot of things he's got to work on. He didn't look great in the preseason, in my opinion. So to me, it's Joe Burrow, it's Cincinnati Bengals. We agree on that one.
All right, hey, let's just get through this NFL Super Bowl champ real quick. And for me, it's Philadelphia. I think I did have Seattle early, but then I thought, you know what, come on, slow down there, Chester. Let's not get 0-2 overboard. But I think Philadelphia puts it up at the end of the year. What about you, Coach?
I've got the Eagles too. Man, we only had 2 divisions that were different. We both picked the same Super Bowl champion. So yeah, I think it's as loaded as the AFC is. I just feel like the way that Philadelphia plays, it's what they do offensively and defensively is so relative to how football is played in the playoffs. It's smash mouth football. They can wreak havoc in the trenches like I don't think anybody else in the NFL can on both sides of the ball. So it's Philadelphia for me too.
All right, hey, let's quickly move on to the NFL award winners. Last year, we did the same show, so here we go. First and foremost, MVP. We talked about the AFC West, and while I'll always will pick Kansas City Chiefs to win it, that's because of Patrick Mahomes. Same thing with the MVP for me. It's hard for me. First and foremost, it's a quarterback award, whether that's right or wrong. It's just the way it's kind of been over the last, few years, and for that reason, I'm going with Patrick Mahomes.
So I think it's a 5-man race, and I think you've got Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts. Those are the obvious top 3 quarterbacks, right? I think you could throw Joe Burrow in the mix, but my other 2, Justin Jefferson. I think this could be the year he goes over 2,000 yards receiving and breaks the NFL record. And then you've got, I think, Christian McCaffrey, if he can stay healthy for 17 games and get back to, what he does and what he did in that San Francisco offense since the time he's arrived in San Francisco. I think there's an outside chance there too. But I went Jalen Hurts. I think they win. I think if you win that division, which is a tough division, we talked about that. The NFC least is now NFC beast. It's one of the toughest divisions in football. You come out of there with a division championship, and you run and you make a playoff run. I get it's a regular season award. It's awarded before the Super Bowl, but I think Jalen Hurts gets the MVP this year. I think he's going to put up the rushing numbers. He's going to give you the touchdowns on the ground, and I think he's going to continue to take another step, as big of a step as he took last year. I think he continues to progress in the passing game. So I went Jalen Hurts for MVP.
There you go. Now, you mentioned 5 guys.
I'm giving way too much love to the Eagles for a Cowboys fan.
I know.
Hey,
you are wearing green tonight. So
I can be subjective. Yeah.
You are wearing green tonight. Who's your offensive player of the year? Does it come from one of those 5 people you just mentioned?
You would think so, but I left one out. Justin Herbert. I think in a Kellen Moore offense, I think he throws for over 5,000 yards. I think you've got, Keenan Allen, Quentin Johnston, Josh Palmer. You've got Gerald Everett, I think is underrated. You got Austin Eckler, who's also had some contract situations. I think he continues to have. And he said in an interview, and I loved it, they were asking him what he thinks he's going to do this year. And he says, I think I'm going to score 20-plus touchdowns. I don't know that I'm going to believe that hype, but he's a guy that could certainly do it. He's proven he can be a guy that can score not only on the ground but through the air. But I think Justin Herbert's going to have one of those years this year offensively. If he can get the completion percentage up, I think Justin Herbert has a chance to have a special year. So I've got him down as Offensive Player of the Year.
I like it. As an LA guy, I'm not necessarily a fan of either the Rams or the Chargers, but I love when there's good football in my own backyard. So I'd love to see that. Let's move on off. And for me, my Offensive Player of the Year, you already did mention him. I think 17 games for CMC in San Francisco.
Yeah.
You look at what he did in 2019 in Carolina. Now he's got better players around him. For me, it's CMC. I'm excited. I want to see him be able to stay.
Absolute possibility.
As much as I love Jordan Mason, I hope I never have the opportunity to play him just because I want to see CMC what CMC does. Yeah, Defensive Player of the Year for me. I'll go first. I'm going TJ Watt. I feel like we talked about what they've done offensively on the defensive side of the ball, man. He is just who would have thought? What a family, huh? Because I don't think that anybody thought that he can live up to his brother's type of play, but he's done it, and I think he'll continue to do it. And I saw where, Pat McAfee offered him $500,000. He said, if you break the single sack season record, I'm going to give you $500,000. So there's extra added motivation, but it's TJ Watt for me.
Well, that's where Jerry Jones needs to step up and tell Micah Parsons, I'll give you $500,001.
There you go.
Right?
Whatever it takes.
He certainly can afford it. I'll let you borrow the yacht for a weekend, but I went Micah Parsons. So this is finally get to pick a Dallas Cowboy. But
there you go.
I mean, hey, I think he's going to have 20-plus sacks. He's already put on a little bit of weight. He's playing a lot more at the defensive end position. There's clips, and there's more than one. He took Tyron Smith, who's a future NFL Hall of Famer, and got underneath his armpit, gave him a punch shot, and knocked him on his ass. And he's done it repeatedly. in camp with anybody and everybody. And Dak Prescott has come out and said it is an absolute nightmare facing that guy when it's ones versus the ones in Skelly or 11 on 11 in Dallas right now and in camp. It was absolutely miserable. And you saw clip after clip after clip where Dak Prescott had to step up. He had to roll out. And he had to do something because Micah Parsons was in his face. I think he's going to have a special year this year.
Love it. He was your rookie of the year a couple of years ago, and he's done nothing but continue to get better. Yeah. Let's move on to rookie offensive player of the year. I'm not going to say much about him. We've been talking. You talk about that Debbie draft I did 3 years ago where I was able to get Gibbs at 6. Well, Bijan Robinson went 1. And Bijan Robinson's going to go 1 as far as running backs go for a long time. So for me, it's Bijan Robinson. Can't wait to finally see him. I did pick New Orleans to win the NFC South. But I'll tell you what, I have no biased opinion on any of that. If Atlanta, if we got something to Desmond Ridder and that offense clicks and they're able to compete, that's going to be a hell of a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, it is. And I went Bijan Robinson. It's the homer pick, right? Another player I got to watch in high school out here at Tucson, South Point Catholic. He's an absolute stud. So watching what he did in Texas as a freshman, and then, of course, when you got his first 2 years of being the guy, where his first year he was kind of splitting some time, but it's Bijan Robinson. We took him as the 8th overall pick, right? So, or was it 4th? I can't even remember what the pick was now. I get him and Kyle Pitts mixed up and where they went, but it's Bijan Robinson. I don't even think it's going to be close as far as if he stays healthy, he's going to get 300 plus touches. He's going to give you 50 to 60 grabs. He could lead the NFL in rushing. That is one thing Arthur Smith can do. He knows how to run the football. So if they can have a lead in games, manage the clock, keep the games close, you're going to see a lot of Bijan Robinson.
I can't wait. I want to see a lot of Bijan Robinson. That's why we play this game, is to see players like that. I can't wait. They throw out generational too much, but to me, he's generational. Rookie defensive player of the year. Who do you like, Coach?
I went Will Anderson. He's so disruptive, and he can line up anywhere. He can play multiple positions. He wreaks havoc. So to me, it was an easy choice. I think there's other guys you could take a look at there, but I went Will Anderson.
You and I are in the same boat for a lot of the same reasons. My only concern is going to get kind of lost in a season that I think they're going to struggle. And for me, if I know that I'm going to struggle this upcoming year, I don't know if I'm selling my 2024 pick to move up to get a Will Anderson. I love Will Anderson. I just don't know if that was the best decision for them. But with that being said, the guy is just so, you say disruptive. He's so strong, so physical, and so athletically gifted. It's Will Anderson for me as well. Coach,
nice.
We got through show 1.
We did. Piece of cake, man.
We did. Hey, I know Coach does as well. Appreciate everyone who's come in and had comments. Again, to go over our show lineup, every Wednesday from here on out up until the Super Bowl, we'll be on at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We always focus on the news of the week, injuries, because unfortunately we kind of avoided some during the preseason, but they're going to be coming. So we'll talk about injuries and who you need to try and pick up in waiver wires. And we'll also have a few guests on Wednesdays.
Yep.
Sunday mornings, we're going to go at 7:30 a.m. That's Pacific Standard Time, 10:30 on the East Coast. We'll have your start, sit, DFS, player prop bets, and game predictions. Coach, I can't wait to really get going next week when we actually get to tune on the TV all day Thursday, all day Sunday, and Monday nights.
You got it, man. I've already got plans for opening night. Cowboys open up against the Giants at 5:20 for the primetime game on Sunday night. And I'll have people over at the house. My wife will be, and a couple other gals that are coming over. Going to get a spread going for all the husbands, and we're going to sit there. We're going to drink a lot of bourbon and watch a lot of football. So I'm looking forward to it, man. It's about time. I gave my wife my 2-week notice.
There you go. You saw that tweet today as well, huh?
Yeah, it was my 2-week notice last week, just to say the NFL is getting ready to start. Here's my 2-week notice as your husband on every Sunday moving forward. But no, shout out to the wives that allow us and give us the time to do a show that we love and give a couple ex-coaches a chance to get on here and talk football.
There you go. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. Coach, appreciate you more than I could ever tell you. We'll see you all guys next week.